If you think these laws were written by men originally, so if you're talking about male on male violence, then a reasonable force, you've got two men who are, they might not be of equal stature, but they're both men, right? And they're fighting each other.
Oh, we don't want to take him away from his children. Oh, he was under stress. Oh, he had a traumatic childhood. Oh, like constantly it feels like our justice system actively seeks reasons to excuse male violent behavior against women, particularly within a sexual context. And yet this law is applied absolutely with no sympathy whatsoever to this woman in particular.
This criminal who should be in jail for the rest of his life, she's going to have to spend the rest of her life in jail. I mean, it's mad.
It's sickening. It's sickening. That woman is a hero as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, absolutely. Hi, I'm Christina Rhodes.
And I'm Tempest Rose.
We are two millennial women 4 decades in.
We're revisiting the culture that made us, with a little more hindsight.
And a lot less bullshit.
We've made our own rules.
Built our own spotlights.
And we're here to speak our minds without playing dumb.
And without playing nice. Welcome back, Tempest.
I'm so excited. That didn't sound very exciting.
So excited.
This episode is going to be great, but would you find it weird if I told you that all the way throughout the 90s, British school children were obsessed with debating the death penalty, specifically within the United States?
Yeah. I mean, a little bit. I do think that there's so much like cultural crossover, political crossover, maybe less so, but cultural crossover between our great nations that, no, it doesn't shock me, but I think it is interesting given that there's obviously other things to worry about in the 90s too.
Yeah, I mean, we were obsessed. This and euthanasia, which is very timely, and we are going to do an episode on assisted dying because it's back in the news. But those were, I guess, an abortion. Those were the topics that we discussed when we were younger. Debating was a thing. I don't know if kids debate in school anymore in the UK.
Such a good question. I mean, I was captain of the speech and debate team. We definitely debated in the US. And I loved it. But yeah, it's such a good question. It's such a valuable skill, too. It would be a shame if schools aren't doing it anymore, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important. I really enjoyed it. Obviously, you did as well. But yes, death penalty. And so when we were throwing around episode ideas, this came up. And it might, I guess, seem like a strange choice for us, given that we don't have the death penalty, which we'll get into in the UK. But I feel it's a millennial thing. We did it at school. And the more I thought about it, when I thought about films at the time, there was so much about miscarriages of justice, the unfair nature of the death penalty. And I think that lives in the millennial mindset, particularly that's come out, I think, now when people talk about prison reform, prison abolition, what justice looks like. I thought, yeah, because we all got indoctrinated when we were teenagers to sort of think obsessively about this. Films, I remember reading The Green Mile. John Grisham was huge at the time. And The Chamber, I must have read that 10, 11, 12 times. Not about the death penalty, but about incarceration. You had Sleepers. I don't know if you saw Sleepers.
No.
Sleepers was a book which they made into a film about 4 young kids who get sent to juvie in New York for an accident, essentially, if I remember correctly. It's not for the faint-hearted, definitely an over-18 watch. So one of them in adulthood murders one of the prison guards who used to torture them when they were younger. And so it's about that. And then Murder in the First, obsessed with Kevin Bacon.
Yeah. But maybe it was culturally, we were all obsessed with the miscarriage of justice. Like maybe that was like the movement that was coming through. And then the death penalty, because absolutely in America, like when I was growing up, it was a huge debate topic too. Maybe that just felt like the ultimate question, right? Because like, do you have the right? And if you do end up killing somebody who is innocent, then it's just like, I mean, it's the ultimate miscarriage of justice.
Yeah, that's true. That's something you just can never take back.
Yeah.
But yes, it's strange to me that in my teenage years, I knew more about your justice system than I knew about my own. And then when we came to thinking about doing this episode, I still retain quite a lot of that information. I knew nothing about the death penalty in the rest of the world. And again, that sort of like cultural impact that America has on the psyche, particularly during the 90s and the noughties, was just so big.
But
that's weird for you.
No, I don't. I don't think so. I mean, I think having been somebody who's growing up in America, but with a Swedish family as well, and spending, a fair amount of time in Sweden, I think it was easy to kind of look back and see also how obsessed with itself America was. Do you know what I mean? America frequently thinks that it is the most important player in the world. Arguably, sometimes they are, sometimes they're definitely not, So it doesn't surprise me that the rest of the world is also chatting about it in a way.
Yeah, I guess America at the time was at its peak of its cultural empire. Of course, there's this whole, is America in decline? Has its moment as the most important, influential country on earth passed? I guess a lot of Trump is the embodiment of a lot of that argument. Yeah. And then we have, we live in moving towards a multipolar society. That's not the topic of today's thing. So I'll start dragging us in that direction. But yeah, we thought we'd talk about the death penalty, prison reform. Now we're in our 40s. Have our opinions changed?
Yeah.
I'm going to guess probably like me, you were staunchly arguing against the death penalty when you were a teenager.
Yes, obviously. But yeah, and I think probably I think I probably feel the same way about it now that I did then, which is that obviously you will have people who, if you can be like confident, 100% know that they did commit those crimes, they're so heinous, they're so despicable, this person just needs to be obliterated off the face of the earth. But the reality is it's not always 100% known. There are hundreds of people who have been exonerated from death row in America.
Is that an actual...
Yeah.
Do you know the figure? Give or take, roughly?
It's between 200 and 260.
Okay.
And I think that, I want to say that it is in more recent years. So yeah, I think the very fact that that has happened is a bit mad, but also the fact that it costs so much more. So it's over $1.2 million more to sort of look after a prisoner on death row from kind of the moment that they become incarcerated to the moment that you take their life than it is for somebody who's on life in prison without parole. Part of that makes sense because in part that is to be able to allow for the defendant to go through like so many rounds of justice so that they can hopefully make sure there's just no way that this person wasn't 100% guilty. And I appreciate that because, again, you do have people who have been proven to be innocent who have been on death row. But I just sort of think, well, why is it worth the taxpayer money to spend $1.2 million more per person or more for this like piece of vengeance when American prison is, as I understand it, not a walk in the park? So how do you feel about it? Has your opinion changed?
Yeah. I've probably come a full circle, but maybe my reasons for feeling how I do now are different to how I felt when I was younger. I'm happy to go into it, but just out of interest, when you were growing up, do you remember how like the class was divided when you were debating? Like, would most people have agreed with you? Was it more polarized? Because growing up in a state where you had the death penalty, like again, we were arguing in the context of we haven't had this for decades.
I think, like memories is 7 centuries ago, but most people were anti-death penalty, but there were definitely some that were pro-death penalty. I'm not going to call them racist, but I do think that of the people who were pro-death penalty, not all of them in my class, there were definitely some that you could I felt a little twinge of you live inside of a very white bubble and you don't feel as much empathy for maybe, some of the false carrying out of justice that has happened for predominantly people of color on death row.
Yeah.
So
I did know, I remember from school, the figure that you state about actually it costs society more in the States, at least because of the layers of justice process you have to go through to execute somebody, that cost more than imprisoning somebody for life. And that was a big persuader for me at the time. It seemed, even taking the morality out of it, not even a justification for the expense. When I was young, I think I probably felt nothing would justify the death penalty.
Sure.
That's a very young opinion, of course. And there will be people who feel this way now.
Yeah.
Completely. But I think for me, probably tallies with a more a less experienced way of looking at the world. And I held that for a while. When I got older, I spent some time volunteering with like a rape advocacy group. Oh yeah, of course, trigger warning. Potentially might come into some topics today that we'll be talking about crime, punishment, certain types of crimes. So just something to be aware of, depending on who you're listening around. So working with a group that dealt specifically with badly handled rape and sexual assault cases, and then learn a lot about how that's handled in the UK and our justice system, and therefore also came across a lot of horrendous crimes, a lot of the most terrible things that people can do to each other. So that was part of my experience. I think also getting older, I mean, I pray to God through reading about it in the paper, but not within your own life. You will come across, again, terrible, terrible crimes that people commit. There really is no end to the unspeakable acts of brutality and sadism that human beings can wish upon each other. So I think being immersed in some of that, I probably went through a period where I thought, you know what, some fuckers deserve to die for what I do. And some human behavior is so disgusting that it should not be tolerated. You do not deserve to live. And now I've come to the conclusion that I still think that's true, but that the state doesn't have the right to take someone's life. Interestingly, when I was talking myself through that, I thought, well, I guess I have to put the caveat, actually, the state doesn't have the right to take its own citizens' life, because through war, of course, the state,
such a good point,
in combat is taking quote unquote enemies' lives. Again, obviously people would disagree with that. Maybe we'll do a whole war episode. But so yeah, I guess the state doesn't have the right to take its own citizens' life as an absolute. But in my 40-year-old decade, I do feel some people do things that are so unspeakable that in theory, they deserve death.
No, I completely appreciate that opinion. Now, you said you did some looking into the death penalty in other countries. So tell me about that.
Yes. So me and the robots got together and we did a little bit of research. Obviously, I'm also checking the sources they gave me in case any of you concerned that I just take ChatGPT, etc. as possible. But it's a great way of aggregating information and going to look at sources. So there's only one European country, Belarus, that still has the death penalty. I skipped over the states thinking that you would do that, but do you know how many states?
Oh, I don't know. I don't remember off the top of my head. It is... I'm not sure. I know that Texas and Florida were the two that did the most killing last year.
Yeah. But, I think you have a lot of states that have the death penalty but don't practice it.
Probably, yeah.
So I think on my list I've got 55 in my head, but when I counted the list of countries, there were 42 countries around the world that still retained the death penalty. And it was interesting to look at. So I suppose it's not just a punishment, it's a deterrent, like the impact, therefore, that the death penalty has on crime in those places. And the two countries that retain the death penalty, Singapore and Japan, actually are pretty not crime-free, but they have very low levels of crime. Singapore uses the death penalty also for drug offenses. And in conjunction with other methods, education, policing, rooting out corruption is obviously really important. I guess all of this lends to, avoiding miscarriages of justice and how things are enforced and preventative measures to stop things getting places. They have a pretty successful, I think, justice system and relatively low-level crime. Other countries who retain the death penalty actually doesn't seem to have much of an impact on making the country safer, which is another big argument, I think, against the death penalty, is that there's not necessarily a correlation, or there isn't. The overall feeling is there is no correlation between having the death penalty and that having a positive impact on violent crime within that country. The robots got very upset with me when I pointed out, actually, there are two countries where there is a positive correlation, and they were very keen to point out to me that is in conjunction with social practices and justice practices that I've mentioned. I mean, I think, let's say we decided to have the death penalty, you have to have it in correlation with a well-run justice system, with a well-run education system.
I think so. I mean, I am sure that there are unique stressors to being on death row in America. But I think the fact that you now can have some level of confidence, as I understand it, to have, looking at almost 2 decades of time incarcerated before your window comes up. And again, I'm sure it's much more complicated than that. But you sort of feel, I just don't know that I would feel like that's a deterrent. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think if you're out there on the street being a serial killer, which when I looked it up for the 19 people that were killed in Florida last year, a lot of them were serial killers. So but also a serial killer is, unless they're like a very fast worker, is doing something over the course of years. So again, I just don't think, I don't know, nothing about it reads to me like this is like a really active deterrent that you know that one day in your probably like 40s to 60s, you'll be caught and then incarcerated.
Yeah.
And then 20 years later, you'll die.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So as I was saying to you, I had everyone has a great teacher at school. My favorite teacher, and anyone who went to my school will know exactly whose name I'm going to say, is Miss North, the history teacher. She was full of wisdom. And one of her great wisdoms was, it's not the severity of the punishment, it's the frequency of the application that modifies behavior. So I guess in the example of death penalty, that clearly hasn't had an impact, knowing there is the potential that you will be executed for your crimes. It's, let's say, a murderer immediately got a 40-year prison sentence. If 90% of murderers knew that they were going to go to prison for X amount of time, that would have a much bigger impact than, let's say, 5% of murderers receive the death penalty.
Yeah.
So it's really, to do with consistency and frequency of application when it comes to punishment of crime rather than the severity of the consequences.
Yeah, which I think, obviously, the fact that in this country you have something like 2 to 2.6%, I think it was, charge rate for rape convictions makes you feel like, again, if I was a rapist, I wouldn't care. Because if you think like 2% is, I have a 2.6%, give it 3% probability of being charged. And that's of cases which have even been brought forth.
Wait, so is that conviction rate?
Yeah.
Okay, so of all the cases charged, which we already know is low, a low number anyway, of that number, only 2% tend to result in a conviction. I mean, this is
that is
a disgusting.
That's my understanding of the statistic, because also how would you possibly know if a rape hasn't been reported? It's very difficult to get the numbers on how many are actually happening, right?
Yes, no, that's true. I know. Yes, fair enough. They do
estimates, sure.
But because you also have rape cases that are investigated, but the CPS declined to prosecute. So I don't know.
I'm not sure if it was included those, but 2.6 of people who've come encountered with the justice system.
Yeah, we have a very low rape conviction rate here.
Yeah,
which is horrifying. And again, of course, is an impact on behavior. Yeah. Surely. Why would you care about the consequences of something are seldom ever going to be applied to you?
Yeah, it's mad to me.
Yeah,
that is mad to me. Tell me, you were also mentioning you looked into a little bit about the UK, but the UK did have a death penalty at one time.
So our last execution was in 1964, and we had hanging here.
Oh, right.
Yeah, which I'm surprised at. I don't know why, because it seems so old-fashioned. But no, hanging was our mode of execution. I think that's probably quite rare in the States.
I could be totally wrong. I can't fathom that's what it is. I know there's a lot of debate. A lot of them use injections now. And there's also debate around that because apparently sometimes states can spend up to $750,000 on the injection. And there's a big argument with pharmaceutical companies and how much they're charging for it and where they even get it. And then circumnavigating the pharmaceuticals to like get it on the black market. I mean, there's all sorts of like shady shit there. To the best of my knowledge, there are no more hangings legally. In the United States.
Okay, so we had hanging. Last 2 executions were for murder. So I looked at some stats because I was really interested. So in the 20th century, give or take, 1,400 people were executed in the UK. That was predominantly for murder, but some was for war crimes and treason. We had abolition in 1965, but we didn't remove all possibilities for death penalty consequences until 1990, which I was so surprised about. Yeah, that seemed wild. But again, I guess it's one of the things that remains on the books in theory, but obviously isn't practiced. So essentially, we don't have the death penalty, even if there was on the statute of the law, the possibility.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's like also why it could have been somewhat popular when we were growing up, when we weren't in school we weren't like probably of a debating age by 1990, but it still would have been in like the like general memory of this being something that happened.
Yeah, no,
could happen.
That's absolutely true. So I thought it was interesting that the murder rate overall dropped since we removed the death penalty. I mean, that's not a to B situation in terms of cause. It didn't go down because of the death penalty. But again, if your argument for the death penalty is the trying to keep society safe, it's not a smooth curve down. There are peaks and troughs to it, interestingly. But overall, murder rates dropped. Violent crime is down in the UK. What I thought was interesting is at the time where, in this kind of mid-60s period, it wasn't that the death penalty was removed because of overwhelming public support. Actually, society at the time was quite divided, as it still would be, I guess. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. I wonder where the push came to ultimately get rid of it then, if it wasn't from public support or overwhelming public support.
Definitely, yeah. I don't know. That is interesting. Well, thinking back on literature and culture kind of absorbing this narrative about death penalty, I find it interesting that all of the films and the stories that we tend to absorb are about miscarriage of justice or kind of crimes that were intentional but perhaps went wrong past the intentions of the accused. And I suppose it's quite hard to make a case, I suppose, of this is somebody, let's make a film about somebody who's done the worst crime ever and then make people cry at the end when they're executed. But that is in fact, what you are arguing for. If you're going to look this in the eye, I do believe that the risk of miscarriage of justice is so great for something you can't take back when it's done that it is a massive persuader for me. But the fact that I do think there is this gut instinct in people, which is totally understandable, to be so horrified, so disgusted by some of the worst crimes that they couldn't make the argument that actually, even though this horrendous serial killer had done all of these crimes, let's make a film about how terrible it is to execute him anyway. Because people do have that instinct. I guess people call it vengeance, revenge. I'm not sure that's always true. I do think that, as a society, you should be horrified by certain types of crime. That's a natural human instinct.
Yeah. I mean, is anybody arguing that they should not feel?
Yes, I do think some people feel no matter the severity of what somebody's done, they're still a human being. They still deserve
Have they read
compassion.
some of these crimes?
Well, yeah, I know. I think I wonder if it's I can hear as this American accent saying bleeding heart, liver, to have more sympathy for the criminal than for the victim who has experienced the crime. I guess some people argue that's the problem with the fact that our society is much safer, that we do, touch wood, experience crimes and violence day to day at a lower level than probably at any other time in history, that we have started to skew our sympathy more towards the circumstances, probably very terrible, that a lot of people who commit violent crime grow up in, then away from the victims of said crime who do deserve justice. And I'm not sure vengeance is wholly wrong sometimes.
No, and I mean, it was cited by the Texas governor that is one of the reasons why the death penalty should still exist, is because it gives the families who's lost someone that real sense of vengeance, that something has been done about it and this person is gone now. I mean, I think also on the extreme, there's also been a question, I know, in the States around mental capability. And I think, obviously there is the question mark, and I think even criminals do deserve, some level of empathy for what they may have endured as children. There's, a lot of people in prison in America had very difficult childhoods, which, we now have the sort of statistics around how that can sometimes alter the way you lead your life in adulthood. But this question around people who are not mentally capable. So if you kill, 4 people, you don't have a very high IQ. Should you be let off the hook? Are you not fully responsible for it if you're not mentally functioning on the same level as everybody else?
Yeah, that's it's a difficult question for sure. And age, I guess, you can execute someone at 18 but not 17. I'm pulling numbers out of the air, but again, where you draw the age. I mean, I think we can all agree, even if you're pro death penalty, you don't execute children. Again, I suppose that's to do with the cognitive function of understanding the implications of your actions.
I mean, I assume so, yeah. Surely it must be. You can't take full responsibility because you aren't an adult. And therefore, yeah.
Yeah, Yes, your brains, well, apparently our brains don't stop fully developing until we're 25.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Plenty happens between 18 and 25 in terms of being allowed to guns and all sorts of things.
Yes.
And being a fully considered, full-fledged adult.
Someone raised an interesting point, I think, has been raised. And again, we're going to do assisted dying. But if the state can't take life for criminal activities, can the state take life even at the request of a person who might be suffering through illness? We're going to get into this.
Yeah.
But I hadn't connected the two before, because if you're absolute, which is probably mine, that it is not the state's role to act as executioner, should that be an absolute?
Yeah, it's interesting because I do think it's a very good question and a good connection. But that was one of the other topics which was debated really hotly when I was in high school. Yeah. It was the death penalty and its use in Asia.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
I was big in.
It's interesting that it's been such a discussion for so long, yet we still, it's a big question, isn't it? But it's like still lingering there.
Yeah, I guess it's the fundamental principle of human liberty. Like, at what point do you not just lose your liberty in general, but your right to your own existence? Like, is there ever a cutoff for that? And we, in our part of the world, we're a very liberal society. And what people have meant by that is that, once you have the principle of the individual, no matter who they are, is worthy of respect, human rights, protection under the law, certain freedoms that we as a society agree, then you come into this situation of where the state runs into that. Whereas previously, when death penalty rates have been much higher, much more commonplace, we haven't had this concept that actually every single individual is a fully fledged human being deserving of, without question, protections under the law. That's quite recent in human history. It's quite recent that we've had this idea of kind of liberal freedom.
Yeah, no, that's true. I do think that there's some examples these days where it's questionable as to, can the state really be protecting both people's right to full justice, basically?
Well, every society has to make a choice.
Yeah.
What their pyramid of priorities are.
Yeah, completely. One of the other questions that I think comes up a lot, maybe not around death row as much, but certainly around the prison system overall, is, do you think that it should be punitive, or do you think it should be geared towards rehabilitation?
Such a murky situation. I'm pleased to talk about it because I think this is like the 2020s big thing. Restorative justice. I had a little look at. I'm not against some forms of restorative justice. I understand some of the arguments for prison abolition. And for young people, I think we should make accommodations in lots of cases, possibly not all, because you are dealing with a person who is malleable and who can't control or take responsibility through maturity to the circumstances that they might have grown up within. So I would suspect a civilized society should make more accommodations to types of what people might call restorative justice, alternative punishment, trying to help young people understand consequences of their actions, particularly, I guess, if you're dealing with things like non-violent crimes, like, the graffiti, I don't know if there's a non-violent assault, but you know what I mean? Like, we have grades, of violence and threat, drugs, theft, stuff like that. Like, I can get on board with a more tolerant way of thinking about that, as long as there is still the lesson of consequences. Yeah. That's really important, I feel.
Yeah.
The older people get, the less my sympathy gets, especially, again, for very antisocial, violent crime, crime that makes society less livable in. I do understand lots of crime is on a vicious cycle of addiction. And I'm not knowledgeable about this, so I guess if people are interested in this, we could do more research and come back with an episode on it. You could eradicate a certain amount of crime by having proper rehabilitation programs for drug addicts. Yeah. And that seems very sensible to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can also get on board with, was it Miss West's version, Miss North's version of justice, particularly for the young people, and moving towards more rehabilitation route, so long as it was, that consequence, and you knew that it was going to be dished out, right? So you just started to really instill in the younger generation, if you commit these crimes, like, you are going to get caught, you are going to serve some form of time or punishment or, discipline, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be locked away and the key will be thrown away if you get caught and at a sort of lesser rate of, conviction.
Yeah, I totally agree. I suppose this also runs into cycles. A lot of people who speak with knowledge of the prison system, ex-wardens, ex-prison governors, you go to prison, you're in a sort of system, as it were, when you come out, unless you've been given proper help to access work, maybe to move away from areas whereby it's very easy to be sucked back into previous acquaintances, previous criminal circles. I mean, prison itself, apparently, you can learn to be a much better criminal in prison. You can learn to be outside, which makes sense. It's certainly not the case also that you won't have access to drugs and other connections. So I'm all in favor of looking at ways to help prisoners upon release, support them and prepare them for release to be better members of society in for everyone's benefit, not just for theirs.
Yeah.
So all of that is great. I think that's probably a relatively new concept as well in terms of like what we do for people who commit crimes.
Yeah. Oh, I'm certainly like in the history of time. Yes. No, I completely agree with that. And I do think I take the opinion that I think for crimes like you're talking about, for certain groups of people, very, very happy to look at more of a rehabilitation style. I also think for a lot of crimes committed by women, which I think we'll probably talk about in a little bit, then very happy for that. But I do think that when you're in prison, I don't think it should be a holiday. I think being in prison should not be a comfortable existence. But I think that when you have finished your term, we have to be able to kind of get on board with what the nature of the punishment is, right? And so if it is that, then it should end there, right? And so then when you come out, you should be supported in, yes, being able to move away from the environments or the factors that led to you potentially being more likely to, to commit crime. You should be able to get a job. I mean, obviously there's a huge amount of information available on this in the US because it often takes a kind of racial stance. But yeah, I think you should be supported. I think for a non-violent crime, at least, it should not be a punishment you carry around for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Prison should be somewhere that you never, ever, ever want to go back to, and you should be supported by making that possible. I lose sympathy much more rapidly when it comes to crimes of a repeat nature that involve violence. So I feel like every woman, hopefully regardless of experience, although sadly often, but also because we talked about safety, how we think about safety all the time on our women episode, rape, sexual assault, the worst kind of crimes that aren't necessarily murder, although obviously can be connected sometimes. Rape is a repeat offense. That's just a fact. You think rape is okay or you don't. You don't accidentally rape somebody, okay? You can accidentally kill somebody, never kill them ever again. That is not the case with rape and sexual assault. And so even though I suppose you could argue in terms of violence, you might be looking at scenarios that are less violent. I mean, that's a terrible way of phrasing that, but hopefully you guys know what I'm talking about. I don't care. I need you away from people that you can do harm to, because in a lot of those cases, there's no path to rehabilitation, or there's a limited path to rehabilitation. Yeah. In which case, that's a question for society. What do you do with these people? Seeing or knowing that through not giving custodial sentences, giving very lenient custodial sentences, what really starts to mess with your mind a little bit when you get involved in some kind of rape advocacy, anti-rape advocacy and lobby groups is that I started to feel every time that person was set free early, was only put on, put on license where you're not in prison, but they're sort of watching you. Yeah. You are condemning another victim to go through something. And that happens time and time and time again. The judges know it. The system knows it. And you do start to feel a little paranoid that like the whole of our institutions are just accepting of the fact that more victims are being put in the path of this perpetrator. Yeah. That makes me very angry.
Of course, because also we all know that so many rape cases happen where the victim never goes to the police. So you're so knowledgeable. It's such a good point. You're knowledgeable about putting this perpetrator out. You're knowledgeable that they're most likely going to commit this crime again, and that it's never ever going to be caught. Yeah. Or captured, or they're going to be, incarcerated for it.
Yeah.
It's really sickening. I mean, the lack of, I think the way in which rape cases get tried, basically like everything to do with rape cases in both UK and the US, I think is just deplorable. You hear about so many horror stories. And, one of the ones we talked about recently was a really just absolute blood curdling story of a woman who was violently in the process of being violently assaulted, raped, and she happened to have a kitchen knife with her in her bag, and she stabbed him and he died. She was in the back of a car under somebody who was much larger than her, and she has just been denied her final appeal to overturn a life sentence because they considered it premeditated because she had a knife on her, which is obviously really different. That would never happen in an American case, right? Because in so many states, you are allowed to carry a gun,
Yes.
a knife. I don't even know if that's illegal in any state. But I don't think it would be seen in the same light, that aspect of it. But also this concept in the UK that I don't know a huge amount about, but and so please, correct me if you know something else, but that it was this reasonable force.
Yeah.
And again, if you think these laws were written by men originally, so if you're talking about male on male violence, then a reasonable force, you've got two men who are, they might not be of equal stature, but they're both men, right? And they're fighting each other. And so therefore, okay, maybe this still seems like a questionable thing if she was a man, but he certainly feels like, okay, maybe she would have more of an ability naturally to defend herself, right? And so to provide more reasonable force. But they considered the fact that she killed him as unreasonable force. And the judge, who I think should absolutely be disbarred, and the one from the recent appeal, basically both said something to the effect that she was not in any imminent danger of death.
Oh my goodness.
Or of major bodily harm. And I think that's such a male view on what rape is and violent rape.
Yeah.
And it was just, it was unbelievable. It's unbelievable to me that this woman who's going to defend herself, who I think is so lucky that she had the ability to ward off this person, this criminal who should be in jail for the rest of his life, she's going to have to spend the rest of her life in jail. It's mad.
It's sickening. It's sickening. I'm we've talked about the story before, but still, my whole body is in anxiety goosebumps. You describe this. I never really, I suppose, explicitly of course, the law is written within a male context. So yes, actually, this discussion of reasonable force, I suppose, has more legitimacy, but this is not the case when you're talking about male violence on women. And I laugh because I sort of, you think about yourself. If a man was trying to attack me, I would have to dig into the depths of my soul, muster every ounce of strength and adrenaline and grit and determination, and probably realize that I had one shot to do it, to get myself out of this situation. No part of me is thinking, gosh, I hope I don't hurt him too much whilst I'm trying to save my own life. This is a madness. That woman is a hero as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, absolutely. And you also think about, and there's so many cases in this country, and I'm sure there are millions more in the US, there's many more in the US, I'm sure, where you have victims of domestic abuse who have been hospitalized, they've been put into near-death experiences, and then they kill their perpetrator in a moment of self-defense, and again, life in prison.
Yeah.
You think, what?
Yeah.
And also, where is the state? How much can the state really value women if, A, these scenarios are allowed to happen, but B, that you fail this woman if she's coming into a hospital and she is within an inch of her life from domestic abuse, and you just let her go back to it because it's a private life, it's private domain, and it's just crazy to me. It seems so out of context that you would dish out this kind of, what feels to me as an extremely disproportionate response.
Yeah. There's no sympathy. There's no will of the state to protect women. The leniency that we hear over and over again applied to male perpetrators. Oh, we don't want to take him away from his children. Oh, he was under stress. Oh, he had a traumatic childhood. Oh, constantly it feels like our justice system actively seeks reasons to excuse male violent behavior against women, particularly within a sexual context. And yet this law is applied absolutely with no sympathy whatsoever to this woman in particular. And yes, of course, like domestic... The books are riddled, unfortunately, with injustice against women who have suffered at the hands of domestic violence. And yeah, you know, a good point, because that's all behind closed doors. So it's sort of considered private, in which case you can't really intrude. Like, you know, it's
not the state's right to do that. Do you think it's the state's right to, in America, to kill this person? Or it's a state, like, where does it's the state right to protect that guy, I guess?
Yeah. I did have a little trip down the research hole because I was interested in countries that had death penalty for rape. Because I feel like this is one of the exceptions that we sort of think, well, things happen to children, particularly, you know, violent rape is an easier... I think much more people in theory say like, oh, yeah, that seems like a no-brainer. It tends to be countries that actually have quite poor records of treating women as equal citizens, who have rape on the books as an executable crime, but it's not particularly fairly applied. It's not often applied. And because it sort of rests in this notion as a woman as property, again, it's not really even a crime against a woman. You're often executing people because it's a crime against your property, essentially, and dishonor either of the family or the father or the husband or something. So sadly, it is not the case that places that have this offer any more security for women, any more justice for women. But theoretically, I'm on board.
Oh, theoretically, I'm on board too, for sure. I actually wonder about one of the things you just said, though. I'm not sure that if we polled, 10,000 people in the UK right now, that 40 of a chunk of the 49%, that all of them would agree that a violent rape is worthy of the death penalty.
Death punishable by death.
I don't think they would. I'm not even sure if the majority of the 51% would.
I think if you said, should rape get the death penalty, a lot of people would start quibbling over exactly how that was applied. And there is this obsession with false accusation. False accusations for rape are incredibly low. The other problem with false accusation narrative is that if the police investigate a rape that they know crime, because essentially they find it almost impossible to get evidence, or a rapist is acquitted, but because the jury can't believe beyond a reasonable doubt based on the evidence, rather than they feel like, actually, no, this didn't happen, that's still considered a false accusation, even though actually circumstantially, in a lot of those cases, the police know it happened, the CPS know it happened, the jury know it happened, but because of legal technicalities, either in the courtroom or when it comes to investigating stage, these crimes are not either prosecuted, investigated as they should be, or convicted. So it's not a straightforward case of like, yeah, we know that this happened, therefore she's a liar. It's very frustrating.
That's super frustrating. But it also just, the whole situation frustrates me because I think, okay, well then I want to be teaching young girls, Krav Maga and self-protection and all these things. But again, but only to a point. Like, you can only protect yourself to a point, but like you definitely don't carry anything that could like push you over the line. And sounds like it doesn't matter what's happening or with how many people or under what situation. You can't possibly kill them by accident even. Like, it's just mad. You think, again, and I know that there's a slight difference of opinions with like the US and the UK, and the US has the stand your ground law, which, allows you to, I suppose, have a strong, like you can kill somebody in your house if they come in to burgle you in some states. And, it's got question marks around it and is being discussed for understandable reasons. But I do think as an American, you grow up with this concept that if somebody breaks into your home or if somebody's like trying to do harm to you, you should be able to reciprocate and you should be able to cause them harm, even cause them death. And that's kind of justified. And I'm not sure I disagree with that.
Yeah, no, you raise an interesting point. Do you think then that the case that you were talking about with the woman knifing her attacker, would that just not have played out that way in America? Or I guess it's state by state, maybe?
Maybe it's state by state. I would have a hard time believing that somebody who is actively in that situation would have been given like as strong of a sentencing, but I'm not sure. But I don't think that the American justice system has like a lot of like love and response rate to rape in America either. Do you know what I mean? So, or like love for protecting women in that department. So, yeah, I would hope not, but you never know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you feel that way though? Like, do you feel that you should? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because of the circumstances. I think people are very uncomfortable talking about the reality of biological differences and strength between men and women. But then I feel like if you flatten all of that and always make this individual against individual, then why isn't something like domestic violence a fight between two equals?
Yeah.
Like, actually, no, we do have some, not enough in, the circumstances that we're talking about. Idea that, certain crimes have certain dynamics because of who the victim is often and often who the perpetrator is, and that should be taken into account. That's why, again, it's not just domestic violence because we're talking about privacy, although that is an issue. It's that also it's very difficult for a woman to protect herself against a man who is being violent. Most violence, male to female or male to male, is perpetrated by men. It's just a statistical fact.
Yeah.
But physically, you can stay, in the majority of cases, women will have a much harder time physically defending themselves, whereas more individual factors come into play, as you were saying, when we come to two men who are, physically having an altercation.
Oh. Yes.
I looked at women in prison. Should we say
let's talk about that. Let's talk about that.
Prison. This idea of prison abolition. So I did wonder, there is an argument that people make. So the majority of women in prison, I'm talking about the UK, I don't have stats obviously from all over the world. The majority of women in prison, half of them are in prison for non-violent offences. So like low-level non-violent crime. The ones that are in for violent offences, the way that the statistics work, we can't extrapolate a lot of that out. So again, a percentage of them will be lower level violent crimes, what is considered violent crime, in a way that is not the same with men. The majority of women who end up in incarceration have experienced high levels of assault, sexual violence, domestic violence at really high levels. And of those women, those who commit a lot of violent crime are doing so within a coercive relationship dynamic. It doesn't mean that they're not culpable, obviously, from the crimes that they commit. But, we love talking about mitigating factors with men who don't. We talk about mitigating factors with women. Although I say that I did try and find out in my research whether if a like-for-like crime equivalent, do women tend to get harsher or more lenient sentences? Women do tend to get more lenient sentences for equivalent crimes than men do. I'm sure that will make some activists incredibly angry. But what gets pointed out a lot is that, so a lot of these are related to drug offences, addiction, coercion, crimes that happen under situations of abuse. They are not often, therefore, repeat crimes. So if you're looking at kind of softening the prison system or as types of restorative justice, prison abolition, you can apply that to women and retain society's safety at a greater level than you can apply it to men. So I sort of explained, we've got that around the houses. There is less threat to society with being more lenient with female crimes than there are with violent male crimes, again, based on type and repeat offence. So I just threw that last week. And the other factor is that a large number of women in the prison systems are also mothers of small children. I suppose I should say young children, because like young teenagers as well. And we know that the detrimental impact on the family, on those children's lives, having the mother incarcerated means that you're people used a phrase like, you imprison the whole family, essentially. So in terms of societal good, there is an argument that you can be much more lenient with female offenders to the, related to the impact on society than with male offenders. So I did sort of think like, oh, well, we have this whole thing about how we can't lock anybody up because there's no space anymore in the male prison system. So if we took a more lenient approach with women, would this allow us to lock up more convicted rapists or, other types of crime that tend to not see carceral sentences, but based on space rather than severity? And then I realized we only have about just over 2,000 women in our prison population at all. So in general, the female prison population is microscopic by comparison to the male prison estate. It's not the solution I had hoped it would be.
I mean, it's an interesting one though, because I think everything you're saying also sounds like that these are crimes which are not likely to necessarily be committed more than once, but also are potentially much more solvable through rehabilitation. And I think that's a much, you can sort of see that path in a much easier light than somebody who's comfortable killing multiple people or raping or, violently, any other sort of like violent crime that is a sort of likely to be a repeat offense.
Yeah. Which I find interesting as well, kind of swinging back slightly, is when so often, like next time they arrest a terrorist or someone on terrorism charges, it's so often that you see that they have previous arrests or investigations or kind of police interactions over domestic violence.
But really?
Yes, but we don't take domestic violence particularly seriously. And you just wonder, like, if we did and we said, okay, men who are likely to be violent in the home actually do have a sort of escalation or a connection with violence against society on a mass scale, if we took that seriously, well, obviously, I feel society as a whole would be safer, but it's not just a private crime, I guess is my point. Next time that comes up in the press, have a little look. And I bet you in so many cases, you will see that they have had previous interactions with law enforcement over domestic violence.
So interesting. It's a really good point. But I think the sad part is that also, the UK prisons are at like 99% occupied or something outrageous. I don't even know how the UK government would manage trying to look after more domestic violence cases. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think people would be like so overwhelmed by it that they
build more prisons.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, it's probably an unpopular opinion, but we need more prisons.
Yeah.
I'm not comfortable with domestic abusers. I'm not comfortable with, child sexually explicit material, pornography. 80% of those cases never see prison time. Hugh Edwards, super high profile, was a BBC news presenter, was in court, no prison time. I don't want a society where that is treated as a low enough level crime that it doesn't warrant being incarcerated for.
I mean, that whole world is just so deplorable because you think, because we talked about this a little bit before, they may have only been caught for what they have on their computer or their phone or what they've been consuming digitally. But I think, like you brought up, it's still being created by someone. This is still being enacted on someone. And what's also important is that if we know that rape cases come to light so infrequently, what do you think about child rape cases? It's not like a 7-year-old is not going to wander down to the police station and report their uncle. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So that this is somebody who, like you said about rape and repeat offense, this is somebody who is sick and twisted and, and is probably ready to do this sort of thing to a child. And society is not set up to protect that child or to, come down on this person or incarcerate them or even find them out.
Yeah.
We don't have that sort of safety net, I don't think.
I wish that, and perhaps a legal bod will turn up in our comments and explain to me why what I'm about to say is totally wrong. But from a sort of experiential point of view, based on what we absorb in the culture, cases that we read about in the news, previous experience I've had in terms of justice for victims, it just, for me, doesn't seem that we take enough into account protection for society for future victims, like knowing when we come to repeat offenses, like how much of a responsibility to society do judges have and the CPS and, our justice system to think, okay, I'm not just dealing with the case at hand, but also the implications of what this person might go on to do, knowing what we know already. I know, people are like, oh, we're going to be like Minority Report, and we're predicting crimes before it even happens. Sorry, I do think you can get to the point. I'm not talking about somebody with no history. I'm not talking about thought crime here, but I'm talking about, we have a long list of statistics that prove certain cases are repeat offenses, especially like you raise a very valid point when it comes to safeguarding children. We have statute of limitations that we talked about earlier. It might be that, as a child, you're not ready to process or something that's happened to you until you are an adult. That window has passed. Therefore, we don't have those statistics in terms of convictions or court cases or prostitutions because you can't prosecutions because you can't prosecute them because the window has passed. We talk a lot, I think, about like, can we find a fairer way to deal with criminals? I'd like, as a woman, to have a fairer way to talk about women's safety when we look at how the criminal justice system works. And I don't think women's voices are taken into account in our experiences enough and our safety.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I genuinely feel that the penal code is, like we talked before, on a whole, written by men, and therefore is going to be more thought about for men than it is for women. What are your thoughts on statute of limitations? Do you think that they should exist?
Oh, even exist?
Yeah.
Well, statute of limitations, some of which, again, I'm not a legal expert, but if I popped into my head from my days of working with a rape advocacy group, largely existed to stop men getting repercussions from stuff they might have done years ago, and that the threat of being prosecuted for that shouldn't hang over a man's head for the whole of his life. Yeah, now
yes,
I remember
it should.
Yeah, sorry.
You did think something wrong.
Yeah.
It should hang over your head until you come forward and admit the crime.
Serve your time.
Yes.
Accept your punishment.
Disgusting.
Yeah. I'm sure there are scenarios where perhaps it's more valid, but it's a hard thing to argue for me when it comes to violent crimes against vulnerable people, women.
Children.
Yeah. Well, there's no statute of limitations for murder. I don't know why there's a statute of limitations for rape.
It's crazy. Is that true?
I'm pretty sure it's true, but I'm perfectly willing for someone to prove me wrong.
But that's mad. You almost think so. And I mean, you obviously, I think about Spotlight and the poor children who went through the Catholic Church and were molested. And in some cases, it had passed the statute of limitation. But again, like you said, it's going to take years, maybe decades, maybe most of your life to process something like that happening because it's so deeply traumatic.
Yeah.
But it will have affected negatively your entire life.
Yeah.
So somebody they've not just robbed you of your childhood, they've arguably robbed you of a huge portion of your life.
Yeah.
And your ability to experience the world in a way that other people are allowed to. And that should not have a statute of limitations on it.
I totally agree. And actually, even as you're saying that, thinking back on, victim statements, you also, obviously the victim is the highest consideration in my mind, but the impact on the family, you condemn that whole family to trauma, to terrible burdens, because of the actions perpetrated against one of the family members. Where's their justice? It's not, I wonder if some men struggle to understand from a woman's perception, a rape can mean the end of your life, regardless if you keep living.
Yeah. I mean, it's heartbreaking, but I think, unfortunately, like most men I've ever spoken to just don't understand it in that kind of way. And I think that's because one of the reasons is because there's not as much, a teenage boy in America, a young adult male in America is not going to have the same fear of being raped in a situation. Maybe if you're a gay man, it's a different situation. But if you're a heterosexual man, you're not worried that the girl you're on a date with, the young woman you're on a date with is going to bust out a dildo and suddenly be so much stronger than you that she can hold you down and force you to have anal sex. Like, it's just not likely.
Yeah.
So they just don't think about it, and therefore they experience it a lot less too.
Yeah, it's just not in the psyche, isn't it? I think that's starting to get talked about a lot more, hasn't it? Like this idea, and at its positive end, the Me Too movement, I guess in part was about trying to say to men, like, you think this maybe is something rare, but for women, lower and higher levels, and psychologically, this is an ongoing fear, trauma, vigilance, and impact in a way that probably just doesn't occur. Yeah, make the exact point. It's not really something that you've had to think about.
Yeah. God, it's just horrific, though. I just think, but it's such an interesting thing about the statute of limitations, like now that we bring it up, for it not expiring for rape, because you just think, well, if sure, somebody can accuse you, but like we've talked about, you're going to have, for them to actually get charged with it, they're going to have some level of, for it to even get to court where other people can know about it, it's going to have some real validity behind it. So it's not this concept that women are running around trying to ruin men's lives by coming up with a rape charge that never happened 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago. It's just crazy to me that people are so okay to just let that go, as opposed to, I don't know, I suppose you're a teenager, you get in with the wrong crowd, you steal something, I don't even know, like you do something much more mundane that, yes, you should have been reprimanded, you should have, done some sort of jail time for, but it's not the same thing as a violent crime.
Is there a statute of limitations on theft?
I don't know.
I feel like we didn't know we were going to take this test.
No.
So neither of us looked this up. Tell us in the comments if you know. We'd love to hear about it. I feel like people also have this naive perception, which I would have had I not come across cases where I have learned that this isn't the case, is that if the police investigate a crime and they find evidence, they take it to the CPS, who then, a Crown Prosecution Service, for anyone who's not super involved in our justice system. And the CPS, if they think it's warranted, the information that a crime has been committed, the jury will then decide. That is not what happens. It is not what happens in cases of rape and sexual assault. The CPS make a decision based on how likely it will be that they will get a conviction. And that benchmark is high. You're already talking about a crime where by nature often it's very private. So I don't actually believe that rape is a he said, she said situation. In the majority of cases, it isn't. But there's been some real shoddy police investigations. That's sometimes to do with underfunding, sometimes to do with misogyny and just kind of an inability to really deal properly with this type of crime. I know some work has been done on that. But again, like that's the reality is at odds, I think, with people understanding that like, if the evidence exists that a crime could have taken place, then obviously you take it to the jury and they assess the evidence. No. Rape cases go to court if the CPS thinks there is an overwhelming likelihood that there will be a conviction. And also, so there's a thing called the rape myth. I don't know if you know about this, but the myth that we as society tell ourselves about rape, for example, that the stranger lurking in the dark who's going to harm you, is totally at odds with the reality of how rape tends to be perpetrated. Sure. You know them. It's to do with relationships often that you already have. It's in the home. It's so it's then also the jury often does this thing. The jury runs into having to assess crimes that are at odds with the expectation of how the victim might act, about how the scenario might play out. And those factors, again, will reduce the likelihood when the CPS makes the assessment that there will be a conviction, even if they know, and I have personal experience, not of myself, but somebody I know who they're like, no, we know that this happened, but very unlikely we'll get a conviction. It doesn't go to court. And then, of course, the perception from the outside is she lied, she made it up, there wasn't enough evidence, it's a he said, she said situation. And that makes me very angry. I wish more people understood the process of how cases even get to court.
Yeah, I had no idea that was the case until you told me. And it's just, I mean, again, I feel like it just feels like women are being let down on the justice system, right, left, and center.
Indeed. Well, on that happy note,
woohoo!
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Happy Wednesday.
Yeah, but it was interesting because I do feel like once we got talking about this, I feel like there's actually so many different things that we could chat about that would be interesting in the future.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, thank you for joining us. We've been the Sirens.
Let us know how you feel. Hey, thanks so much for listening. We love making this podcast and we really want it to grow. So if you enjoyed listening to us,
please like, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating. Also, feel free to comment, DM us, open up a conversation. The whole point of this podcast is to be in support of having open lines of communication and debate, and we would love to hear from you.
Listen to the Sirens.
Woo!